What if one of the simplest movements your body already knows how to do is actually keeping your mind stuck in the same direction your entire life? You wake up, you move forward, you chase goals, you repeat routines, you push ahead every single day thinking that progress only exists in one direction. But here's a question most people never stop to ask. What if constant forward motion is not always growth? What if, without realizing it, forward living has also been building stress, mental noise, physical imbalance, and silent patterns that keep repeating in your life no matter how hard you try to change? Now imagine something strange. Something that feels almost too simple to matter. Walking backwards, not as a trick, not as a joke, but as a reset. A reversal that forces your mind to wake up, your body to relearn balance, and your awareness to come back into the present moment like it has been waiting there all along. Because the truth is, most people are not struggling because they are lazy or incapable. They are struggling because they are running forward on autopilot without ever stopping to question if their direction is even aligned anymore. And sometimes the most powerful shift in your life doesn't come from pushing harder, it comes from breaking the pattern completely. In the next few minutes, you are going to hear something that sounds simple on the surface, but carries a deeper meaning underneath it. Something that connects movement with mindset, body with awareness, and direction with destiny. And if you stay with this till the end, you may never look at progress, habits, or even your own daily routine the same way again. When a person begins to walk backwards, something unusual happens inside the mind that does not occur during ordinary forward movement. Because forward walking is so deeply programmed into human behavior that the brain treats it as automatic and requires almost no conscious effort. But the moment the direction is reversed, the brain is forced out of its comfort of habit and into a state of heightened awareness where every step demands attention, balance, and deliberate control. This shift interrupts the unconscious programming that governs most daily actions, and in that interruption lies the beginning of mental rewiring, because the brain cannot rely on memorized movement patterns anymore and must actively process each micro-decision involved in motion. This creates a rare mental focus becomes sharper, perception becomes clearer, and the individual becomes more present in the moment rather than lost in scattered thoughts or emotional noise. In forward walking, the mind often drifts into autopilot, thinking about problems, worries, or future plans, but backward walking breaks that loop by introducing uncertainty into a task that is normally certain, and that uncertainty forces the brain to recruit new neural pathways that are usually dormant. Over time, this activation strengthens cognitive flexibility, meaning the mind becomes more adaptable not only in physical movement but also in handling challenges, decisions, and unexpected situations in life. There is also a deeper psychological effect taking place, because when the body moves in a direction opposite to what it is conditioned for, it subtly communicates to the subconscious mind that change is possible even within established systems, and this realization begins to dissolve rigid thinking patterns that keep individuals stuck in repetitive cycles. The act itself becomes a training ground for mental discipline, requiring presence, awareness of surroundings, and control over balance, which naturally enhances coordination between mind and body. As this coordination improves, the brain starts to build stronger neural connections associated with attention, spatial awareness, and reaction control, making the mind more alert even outside the practice itself. What appears to be a simple physical reversal gradually becomes a symbolic and neurological reset, where the mind learns to step out of routine pathways and engage with reality in a more conscious and awakened state. And this awakening is not limited to movement, but begins to reflect in how thoughts are processed, how decisions are made, and how life situations are approached with greater clarity and intention. When mental clarity begins to fade, it is rarely because the mind has lost intelligence, but because it has become overloaded with unnecessary signals, repetitive thoughts, emotional clutter, and continuous internal dialogue that never pauses long enough for real understanding to surface. And in such a state, even simple decisions start feeling heavy and confusing, as if the mind is walking through fog that thickens with every passing thought. Walking backwards disrupts this internal chaos in a very unique way, because it forces the brain to step out of its usual processing rhythm and concentrate fully on something immediate and physical, removing attention from abstract worries and redirecting it toward present moment awareness, where the only concern is balance, direction, and controlled movement.
This sudden shift acts like a mental interruption that breaks the chain of overthinking, because the brain cannot sustain deep rumination while simultaneously managing an unfamiliar physical task that requires precision and awareness. As attention shifts outward into the body and environment, the internal noise begins to slow down naturally, not through force but through redirection, and this redirection creates space within the mind where clarity can re-emerge. In that space, thoughts that were previously tangled start to separate, like clouds dispersing after a storm, allowing a person to see situations more objectively rather than emotionally. And this is where real mental reset begins to take place. The unusual nature of backward movement also signals the nervous system to become more alert, which reduces mental fatigue caused by prolonged cognitive strain, and as alertness increases, the mind becomes less reactive and more observant, which is a crucial shift for clear thinking. Over time, this practice conditions the brain to recognize that clarity does not come from thinking more, but from thinking less and focusing better, and that realization slowly changes how mental energy is used throughout the day. Scattering attention across multiple worries, the mind learns to anchor itself in the present, which naturally reduces anxiety and mental pressure, allowing decisions to feel lighter and more intuitive. Even after the physical activity ends, the effect continues subtly, because the brain retains the state of focused awareness for a period of time, influencing how thoughts are processed afterward, and gradually, the individual begins to experience moments of calm understanding, even in situations that once felt overwhelming, as if the mind has been reset from a cluttered room into a clearer and more organized space where thinking becomes simpler, sharper, and more aligned with reality. When the body is used in only one predictable direction for most of life, it begins to develop imbalances that are not immediately visible but slowly accumulate over time in the form of weak stabilizer muscles, reduced coordination, and uneven joint engagement. Because forward walking primarily activates a familiar set of muscles while leaving others underused. And this creates a silent asymmetry in physical development that the person rarely notices until stiffness, fatigue, or postural issues begin to appear. Walking backwards introduces a completely different pattern of movement that forces the body to recruit muscles that are normally passive, especially in the calves, hamstrings, hips, and lower back stabilizers, which suddenly have to work in harmony to maintain balance and controlled motion in an unfamiliar direction. This activation is not just about strength, but about coordination, because the body can no longer rely on momentum or habit, and must instead engage in precise control of each step, which improves neuromuscular communication between the brain and muscles. As this coordination develops, balance improves significantly, since the inner stabilizing systems of the body are being trained in ways that forward walking does not provide, and this leads to a more grounded physical presence where movement becomes more controlled and less prone to strain or misalignment. Over time, the joints also benefit because backward movement reduces repetitive stress patterns that often come from constant forward propulsion, giving certain areas of the knees and hips a different range of engagement that promotes flexibility and reduces stiffness. Posture naturally begins to adjust as well, because the body is forced to stay upright and attentive to maintain equilibrium, which strengthens spinal alignment and encourages a more centered stance in everyday movement. What appears at first to be a simple reversal of direction gradually becomes a corrective physical exercise that brings balance to areas of the body that have been neglected by routine motion, and this balance extends beyond muscles into overall body awareness, making the individual more conscious of how they move, stand, and carry themselves throughout the day. With continued practice, the body starts to feel more integrated and responsive, as if previously disconnected parts are now working in unity, creating a sense of physical stability that supports not only movement, but also endurance and resilience in daily activities, allowing the individual to experience a stronger connection between intention and motion, where every step feels more controlled, aligned, and efficient in its execution. Most people live their lives moving forward in a way that feels productive on the surface, but internally it often becomes a mechanical repetition of the same thoughts, routines, and reactions, where the mind and body operate without real awareness, almost like a machine, following instructions it never questions. And over time, this creates a dangerous state of autopilot living where days pass, decisions are made, and actions are taken, yet very little of it is done with full presence or conscious intention. In this state, life becomes predictable not because it is simple, but because it is and the individual begins to lose sensitivity to their own behavior, emotions, and direction, simply repeating what has always been done because it requires less mental effort than questioning it. Walking backwards interrupts this cycle in a powerful way because it removes the comfort of familiarity and forces the brain to step into a situation where automatic behavior is no longer possible, and every movement must be consciously guided, which immediately pulls attention internal distractions and anchors it into the present moment. This disruption is important because autopilot living thrives in environments where the mind is free to drift without resistance. But backward movement creates resistance that demands awareness. And in that awareness, the illusion of automatic living begins to break. The person is no longer simply walking. They are actively engaging with each step, sensing their environment differently, recalibrating balance, and adjusting continuously, which creates a state of heightened consciousness that feels almost like waking up from mental sleep. This experience reveals how much of daily life is lived without true presence, and that realization itself becomes a turning point where the mind starts to question its own habits and patterns. As this awareness deepens, it becomes easier to recognize other areas of life where autopilot has taken control, such as decision-making, emotional reactions, and daily routines that are followed without thought. And this recognition opens the door to intentional living, where actions are no longer driven purely by habit, but by conscious choice. The body in this process becomes a tool for awareness rather than just movement, reminding the mind that control and presence are always available if attention is directed properly, and this shift gradually weakens the grip of unconscious behavior patterns, replacing them with a more deliberate and mindful approach to life where each action carries purpose rather than repetition, allowing the individual to step out of mechanical existence and into a more awakened state of being where life is experienced directly rather than automatically. When the brain is exposed to unfamiliar movement patterns, such as walking backwards, is forced to operate outside of its well-established neural shortcuts. And this is where real cognitive development begins, because the human brain is designed to conserve energy by relying on repetition, but growth happens when repetition is interrupted, and new pathways are. In forward walking, the brain uses deeply ingrained motor programs that require minimal conscious input, allowing attention to be used elsewhere. But in backward walking, those programs are no longer sufficient, so that the brain must actively calculate distance, direction, balance, and timing in real time, which increases neural activity in regions responsible for coordination, spatial awareness, and executive function. This heightened engagement strengthens synaptic connections, meaning communication between neurons becomes more efficient over time, and this efficiency directly translates into improved mental sharpness, even beyond physical activity. As the brain adapts to this demand, it becomes more flexible in how it processes information, which is a key factor in cognitive resilience, because a flexible mind is better able to shift perspectives, solve problems, and respond to unexpected challenges without becoming overwhelmed. Memory also benefits from this process because the brain is constantly encoding new sensory and spatial information during the unfamiliar movement, which strengthens attention span and improves the ability to retain details in other areas of life. Another important effect is the increase in focus, because backward walking requires sustained attention to avoid imbalance or collision, and this continuous focus trains the mind to resist distraction, which is one of the biggest weaknesses in modern thinking environments filled with constant interruptions. Over time, this practice conditions the brain to stay engaged in the present task instead of scattering attention across multiple thoughts, and that this improved focus becomes a transferable skill that influences work, learning, and decision-making. The nervous system becomes responsive as the brain develops faster reaction times to maintain stability and coordination during movement, which enhances overall mental agility. And the simple physical challenge gradually transforms into a cognitive training process where the brain is being reshaped through experience. Reshaping leads to a stronger, more adaptable mental framework that can handle complexity with greater ease. In this way, backward walking becomes more than physical exercise. It becomes a structured stimulation for mental growth, where the mind learns to think and remain steady under cognitive pressure, gradually building interpreting and responding the world around it. There is a deeper layer to walking backwards that goes beyond physical exercise or mental stimulation, because it carries a symbolic meaning. It reflects how real progress in life is not always a straight line forward, and often most Transformation begins when a person is willing to revisit what they once ignored, avoided, or misunderstood. And this idea becomes clear when the body is forced to move in reverse, because it creates a physical metaphor for the inner truth that growth sometimes requires stepping away from familiar direction in order to correct alignment. Many people assume that success is built only on constant forward movement, but in reality, unchecked forward motion without reflection can reinforce the same mistakes repeatedly, creating a cycle where effort increases but results remain limited. And this is where the concept of reversing direction becomes meaningful, because it represents the courage to pause habitual momentum and reassess whether the current path is truly leading toward progress or simply repeating old patterns in a different form. When someone walks backwards, they are not going against progress itself, but they are challenging the assumption that progress must always look linear. And in that challenge, there is a psychological awakening where the mind begins to understand that correction is not failure, but refinement. Sometimes the strongest form of movement is the one that'll calibration before continuing forward with greater awareness. This physical reversal also mirrors emotional and mental experiences where individuals often need to revisit past decisions, unresolved thoughts, or ignored signals from their own intuition in order to understand what needs adjustment before real advancement can occur. And just like the body must carefully adjust each step to maintain balance while moving backward, the mind must carefully evaluate past experiences without judgment to extract clarity from them. Over time, this practice builds a mindset that is not afraid of revisiting difficult areas, because it recognizes that avoidance does not lead to growth, but conscious reflection does. And this creates a stronger internal foundation where decisions are no longer rushed but refined through awareness. The symbolism extends further into the idea that true direction in life is not defined by speed, but by alignment. And sometimes slowing down or temporarily reversing perspective is what ultimately allows a person to move forward with more precision and strength. And in this understanding, walking backwards becomes a reminder that progress is not just about distance covered, but about the quality of direction chosen, where every correction made in awareness becomes a silent preparation for a more stable and meaningful advancement ahead. And in the end, walking backwards is not just an unusual physical act, it becomes a powerful reminder that life is not built only on constant forward motion, but on awareness, correction, and conscious control of direction. It teaches that the mind becomes sharper when it is interrupted from autopilot, that clarity returns when mental noise is reduced through focused presence, that the body becomes stronger when neglected muscles are activated through unfamiliar movement, and that true intelligence grows when the brain is challenged to think in new patterns instead of repeating old ones. It also reveals that breaking routine is not destruction of discipline, but refinement of it, because real discipline is not about staying the same, it is about evolving with awareness. When the body learns to move differently, the mind begins to think differently, and when the mind begins to think differently, life itself starts to open new perspectives that were previously invisible due to habit and repetition. Most importantly, it reflects a deeper truth that progress is not always a straight path. Sometimes it requires stepping back, reevaluating, and realigning before moving forward with greater strength and precision. And those who understand this principle gain an advantage not just in physical balance, but in mental clarity and life direction. Good luck on your journey of growth, awareness, and transformation. May you walk forward with purpose, and when needed, even walk backward with wisdom, always returning stronger, clearer, and more focused than before. Thank you.